Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeform, a world that just might work. And I'm going to be speaking today with Jonathan Taplin, Director Emeritus of the USC Annenberg Innovation Lab and the author of Move Fast and Break Things, How Google, Facebook, and Amazon Cornered Culture and Undermined Democracy, and The End of Reality, How 4 billionaires are selling a fantasy future of the metaverse, Mars, and crypto. We'll talk about the state of things with an eye on the relationship of, and here comes a basket full of stuff, AI, democracy, authoritarianism, inequality, billionaires, the arts, and the military. And you can learn more at John Taplin, that's Jontaplin, Jontaplin, all one word.com. On Freeform, we explore the work and the lives and the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com, and podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net. We're in a time of madness, driven by technology's rewiring of our attention, consciousness, identity, appetite, and morality, and by the actions, attitudes, and personality of the tech oligarch's chosen president. So I reached out to Jonathan Taplin. His work and his understanding of how concentrated power shapes culture and democracy make him an ideal sounding board for this moment. In my introduction to our 2023 conversation regarding his book, The End of Reality, I said, it's deeply disheartening to see the power, wealth, and expertise of leading players in this game of life focusing on escape, whether from government regulation with crypto, from reality with VR. That didn't last long. From this planet with travel to Mars, or from the very bounds of human existence with cyborgian transhumanism. I had hoped the shared vulnerability we experienced during the pandemic might bring us together, as the experience of the Depression and World War II seemed to do in the 20th century, leading to a thriving middle class and shared prosperity. Instead, we confronted our common threat with only more tribalism and distrust. I always assumed that if we could move public opinion to the point where a majority or large majorities began to favor the policies and the actions that would produce well-being, that we might respond effectively and fairly and justly to our big challenges. Instead, minority rule, whether through gerrymandering, misinformation, or the unethically stacked Supreme Court, has moved the goal line, and the common good slips further and further away. And this was in 2023, during the last years of the Biden administration. Today, I believe we confront a number of interwoven stories and trends: technology, AI, democracy, authoritarianism, inequality, billionaires, the media, arts, culture, climate, imperialism, and the military. John has been thinking and writing about our march toward this moment for years. And he's written a series of thoughtful pieces so far this year in Rolling Stone that will form the frame for today's conversation. Their titles: 1, Can the Counterculture Rise Again? 2, The Terrifying New Era of American Imperialism. And 3, The Rise of the Digital Oligarchy. Jonathan Taplin is the Director Emeritus of the USC Annenberg Innovation Lab, a former tour manager for Bob Dylan and the band, and the producer of several films, including Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets and the great music documentary The Last Waltz, featuring Robbie Robertson and the band, and Wim Wenders' Until the End of the World. He's the author of Outlaw Blues, Adventures in the Counterculture Wars, Move Fast and Break Things, and The End of Reality. Welcome again, Jonathan Taplin, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
Good to be here, Terrence.
Okay, John. Let me tell listeners we're recording this conversation Tuesday, April 7th, 2026. I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas we talk about. So you spent time in the trenches of popular culture and then in academia, trying to make sense for yourself and your students of the ways of culture, media, and power. Can you tell us just a little bit about your time at USC, how you approached teaching and research, and then finally, how you would describe your current role today in society?
Well, it's all of a piece. And, I've never stopped teaching in the sense that when I write essays for Rolling Stone or I write books, I'm trying to impart some wisdom that's kind of personal and some that's kind of philosophical. I have used this notion that we are in an interregnum for a while, and the interregnum comes from a quote from the Italian philosopher Gramsci, who said, "The old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, many morbid symptoms occur." So, just in terms of where we are today, on a day when our president has said he's
Yeah.
potentially going to wipe out a whole civilization, um, if you think about the history of the Cold War, which ended in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down, it was expected by one and by all that we would have what would be called a peace dividend. In
Oh,
other
yeah.
words, that the military would assume a smaller part. We didn't have to fight a nuclear power like the Soviet Union, and it turned out that they were kind of a Potemkin village anyway. Um, but that never happened. The military budget today is much higher than it was during the height of the Cold War, even on an inflation-based adjusted basis. Uh, if you think about climate, so the old is dying. We all know that the fossil fuel world is dying, and obviously with oil at $110 a barrel, we all have a pretty good sense of that. In a car, not a Tesla, I promise you, but and it seems obvious that that's the direction of the world, and obviously the Chinese are the leaders in both solar, wind, and electric vehicles, and we're eliminating any wind power. We're stop subsidizing any solar and making electric vehicles much more expensive to buy. So in that sense, that there's old is dying, but the new cannot be born, the new world of renewable energy. And on the internet, you think about 1989, Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. And in some sense, we thought at that time that we were in the middle of a communications revolution, that the old system of three television networks and everything was going to die. And we would have this incredibly democratic, wide open medium where anybody had a microphone and everything. And yet, here we are 20, 30 years later, and the internet is monopolized by three corporations, Meta, Google, and Amazon. So uh, nothing has really changed. And the biggest problem, obviously, is that we live in an oligarchy. We live in a system that is totally dominated by money. Uh, I have a chart in the most recent Rolling Stone thing that shows that the percentage of the 0.0001% of America, their percentage of wealth has risen so radically, especially just since the Trump era, that it outranks any other, demographic profile. So I believe that, we have got to confront these monopolies. We have to obviously confront the fact that AI could change the whole nature of the way economics is going to work. And until we are willing to handle the tech overlords, um, we're going to be in the same problem. And now, of course, the tech overlords are pushing their way into the military industrial complex. Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are on the government payroll to build uh, an absurd thing called the Golden Dome that would supposedly protect us from any missiles that came in. It's the same idea that Ronald Reagan had 25 years ago.
Right.
And it wouldn't work then and it won't work now. You know, the idea of shooting a bullet with a bullet is not a reasonable idea. If only one gets through, you're toast.
That's right. As you
So,
say, my imperfection is failure in that case.
yes, exactly. So, we're in a very strange time. And one of the things in the first article you mentioned, we used to have a counterculture.
Right.
You and I both grew up in a period of the 60s when the artists were on the front lines of fighting the war in Vietnam and fighting for civil rights. And today they're nowhere to be seen. They've basically most of them have sold out, with maybe the exception of a couple of old geezers like myself, like Bruce Springsteen and Bono. But in general, the younger artists are completely silent. Uh, they make their livings oftentimes as advertising spokesmen. Just think about Snoop Dogg. I mean, here was a guy that was at the forefront of a cutting edge hip hop movement with Dr. Dre, um, you know, helped produce The Chronic, one of the great albums of that period. And today, Snoop Dogg is an advertising salesman. He will do a commercial for any product that you have as long as the check clears. So he's sold out completely, and he's never going to be against the war, even though he was Mr. Fight the Power,
Mm-hmm.
or in the 70s. That's gone. He's living in his mansion and smoking his bone, but he's never going to say anything against Trump because his sponsors wouldn't like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he's the sort of the almost at this point a faux rapper that is pleasantly appealing to everyone.
Right. And quite frankly, advertisers don't mind if he has a reputation for
Right.
smoking weed, but they don't want him to have a reputation for dissing the president.
Exactly. Exactly. That was a great setup. Let me ask you a couple of questions about some of the things you raised. One is just this notion, which you are not the only one to talk about because it seems appropriate, which is this interregnum. And I just want for listeners to not necessarily get the Webster definition, but how it is that we find ourselves in an interregnum and what Gramsci meant. Is it a transition? Is it a vacuum? What is, in other words, not so much, as I said, not the dictionary definition, but the meaning, if you will.
Well, let's just unpack that a little bit. First off, if you think about the old that is dying, obviously on a macro sense, the old that is dying is Donald Trump's vision of America. That is, make America great again. Well, what does make America great again? It means let's go back to the 50s when white men were in control and women and people of color and gays didn't give them any shit. Well, that's not a realistic picture of America in the future. And we're already a multicultural society in every possible way. And that's never going to fly. But then the idea of, well, the new cannot be born is also contested too, because on one level you have people like Elon Musk who think what the new is a world in which the robots and the AIs do all the work and the people basically sit at home and play video games or do something, and They're on the dole. Their idea is universal basic income.
Right. And
So
let
the
me just jump
government,
in for 1 second and just say the image that I always get with that is that image in the animated film Wall-E, right?
absolutely.
And it's sort of ballooned, obese people in recliners watching screens, and that is what life has become.
Right. So that's not a future. In other words, somehow modernity in the future got hijacked by these greed heads, by people who are going to make billions off of it. And a long time ago, we always used to talk about on the internet, you are the product,
Yes,
right?
right. If,
Right.
if if
So
the
so
service is free, you are the
right.
product.
Right. And so, you know, you have to hand it to Mark Zuckerberg. He did come up with a business plan that was brilliant in the sense that he never had to manufacture anything, right? He never had to make a product because the people on his service made the product. And yet he took all the money with his advertising. He never had to pay to get it out to people because they paid for their internet connection. So if you said to me, well, let's have a business where we don't have any cost of manufacturing and any cost of distribution, well, no wonder his gross margins are 80%. You know, okay, it's a genius idea, but it's a genius idea because it basically uses your labor and your content to make all the money. And that's why, musicians that I've been supporting since Move Fast and Break Things have gotten ripped off by these people. You know, just think about the new AI. I read yesterday that on the Billboard Chart 100, there are 14
Oh,
tunes
oh no.
that are AI created. Okay, so
Out of the top 100.
yeah, so these people who make these things, they're taking money out of the pockets of real, actual artists. And how did they train those AIs? They
Sure.
trained it by downloading every single tune from Google into their engine to understand what a good song was. And then they could re engineer it, remix it, basically in the AI, and create knockoffs of hit songs. Well, that is a kind of thing that will basically create nothing but dystopia and immiseration of the real artists, the people who actually make movies, that make music, that make art, that make books. And this is happening everywhere. It's happening to photographers, it's happening to visual artists, it's happening everywhere. And it's a pretty terrible situation. And yet Trump is financed by
Right.
these, what I call the technocracy. So, Elon Musk is willing to spend $300 million to get Trump elected because he knows that Trump will make sure that he gets his big share of the NASA budget and of the defense budget. And the same with Peter Thiel and Palantir. He will get the $10 billion contract from Homeland Security to make sure that he can track every alien in America. I mean, it's astonishing how they're using their ability, the old military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about is now the digital military-industrial complex.
Right. I actually interviewed William Hartung and Ben Freeman about their book, The $1 Trillion War Machine.
Right.
And that is one of their, and so folks, you can find that in the archives. Uh, it was within the last 6 weeks or so, but their book focuses on that piece of what we're talking about. That the military industrial complex had sort of monopolized itself down to about five big defense companies, and they had a gravy train which seemed unstoppable except now they've been nudged aside, or the attempt at least is that they be nudged aside by the new tech billionaires, who it looks to me, and certainly to Hartung and Freeman, I assume to you, are worse than what they're replacing.
Absolutely. At least, Lockheed believed it had a kind of allegiance to
Right.
America.
An allegiance, a
I mean,
responsibility of
because
some sort.
so Elon Musk will sell his satellite service to any oligarch all over the world. I mean, he'll sell it to Malay and Argentina. He'll sell it to, Orban. He'll sell it to Putin. He'll sell it to anybody. And so he has no allegiance to America. He's, as somebody pointed out, he basically taught the Chinese how to make an electric car. And now, of course, they're making a better electric car than he makes, and he's a little pissed off, but it's his fault.
Yep. Yep. And let me see. There's so much to unpack in what you said. Um, One thing, let's just look at lobbying or investment in politicians has always been the best investment a company could make. The
Right.
return, the ROI is absurd. Now, it seems to me that the scale has leapt with these guys. One, the scale of what they can afford to buy their politicians with, as you point out, Musk at 300 million, uh, and um, and then what they're able to reap. It would be enough, Jonathan, if all they reaped was a lack of regulation, if all they reaped was freedom to do as they wish. But as you point out, that's not enough for them. They also want to take over the defense industry, which is the largest, I would say, in some sense, most profitable industry around.
And
And
they're also taking over the communications industry.
right.
I mean, you think about what Larry Ellison is doing right
Oh,
now. Trump is basically creating a state media. So he's got TikTok owned by Larry Ellison.
right.
He's got X owned by Elon Musk. He's got CBS News owned by Larry Ellison. He's pretty soon going to have CNN owned by Larry Ellison. He's got Jeff Bezos making the Washington Post into kind of a house organ. He's got Mark Zuckerberg no longer trying to do content moderation. So all of this horrible content is back on Meta and on Instagram. And, Trump's got his kind of megaphone that he can control. And I made the point in this most recent article that even if the Democrats won the midterms, which is obviously a contested notion because Trump might do something to stop the midterms. But even if they won and were able to call hearings and make Pete Hegseth come up in front of Congress, Hegseth could sit there and lie his ass off and have the Trump House media say it was all true, and people wouldn't know the difference. That's
And as you have
unfortunately the
just
problem.
right, and as you have just pointed out,
Yeah.
say 5 years ago, when we said the Trump media, we meant Fox, some things on X, and then a few other smaller cable networks. But as you point out, what these guys have done in almost since the inauguration is take over all those big chunks of mainstream media. And so um, what what was safe media for Trump 5 years ago is now basically a huge percentage of what used to be almost a counter to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, you think about how the the people who ran the media in the 50s, for instance, Bill Paley
Mm-hmm.
was chairman of CBS, and when McCarthy was taken on by Edward R. Murrow, and Joe McCarthy was, for your listeners who don't know, was a right-wing demagogue who was accusing everybody of being a communist. And eventually CBS took him on and basically eviscerated him. But in the midst of the fight, McCarthy threatened William Paley that he would get all his broadcasting licenses revoked. And of course, in those days, that's all Paley had was his broadcasting. And he basically said to McCarthy, pound sand, come at me. And you compare that to the behavior of the people at CBS this year when Trump filed this ridiculous suit against 60 Minutes for editing Kamala Harris's interview.
Yeah,
Now,
which media
Terrence,
have done
you've made
forever.
documentaries. I've made documentaries. You shoot about 100 times as
Right.
much footage as you ever use. The whole notion of documentaries is editing. So Trump sues them for editing a documentary. This is insane. And what do? They settle. They give him $15 million for his library or something, so he can put up a 50-foot gold statue of himself in Miami. I mean, it's pretty sick. And even Bob Iger, who I thought was a good guy, knuckled under to
That's right. He's
the Jimmy Kimmel thing.
He's at Disney and ABC,
Yeah,
and they buckled as well on
Jimmy Kimmel.
but also they did another of those small settlements, right?
Yeah, for George Stephanopoulos said something wrong or slightly off, and they paid 15 million for that too. So they've all chickened out.
This is Free Forum, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally, speaking today with Jonathan Taplin, Director Emeritus of the USC Annenberg Innovation Lab. As we've covered, he's a former tour manager for Bob Dylan and the band, and he was a producer of films for Martin Scorsese. And his books include Move Fast and Break Things and The End of Reality. And they both are really grist for today's conversation about where we find ourselves. We're talking about the state of things with an eye on the relationship of AI and democracy and authoritarianism and inequality and billionaires and the media and the military. And you can learn more at jontaplin.com, JONTAPLIN.com. Now, by the way, John, I don't remember if we anticipated what would happen when, as you point out, when you were talking about Paley's situation vis-a-vis McCarthy, you said he threatened to take his licenses, which was all he had. In other words, Paley was in the media business. He was in the news business. Most of RCA, they had a couple of, they had labs and stuff, but basically they had NBC, they were in the media business. That was their business, that was their wealth. When these billionaires come in and buy a media company, it's strictly so that it becomes an organ they can control, because the loss of their media income or even their media business is a rounding error compared to their wealth.
Right. I mean, obviously, Jeff Bezos is willing to lose millions at the Washington Post in order to still have influence in DC.
Right.
Have a paper to write what he wants.
But it's incidental to the money he's making with his cloud services, etc., that he's selling to the government.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, they have bigger fish to fry, and the media, which is the sort of the absolute bloodline of democracy, is just a little trinket for them.
Well, I mean, obviously, look at
their other businesses. Yeah.
Look at Musk. Musk buys Twitter.
Yeah.
And he way overpays, and he acknowledged that. He tried to get out of it because he overpays so much. But he didn't, at the end of the day, he didn't care, because he wanted the influence that it would give him, where, everybody who's on Twitter has to see what Elon has to say. unless you actively block Elon's account, you get Elon's stuff on Twitter. So, I mean, that was worth it to him to overpay. And of course, he has used Twitter to hype the stock of Tesla and hype the stock of now this new IPO he's going to roll out. And if you were a rational investor, you would not be an owner of Tesla. The stock sells at almost 300 times its earnings, whereas Apple stock sells at 30 times its earnings. So it's not a rational investment. It's just a fanboy investment. It's like, buying GameStop or something like that.
Right. No, but as I say, I don't remember conversations about this phenomenon before it began to happen. In other words, that obviously there was a a gap in the relationship of democracy and media, that when our most influential media becomes just a minor piece of someone who has much bigger fish to fry with the government, it changes everything. And
But
I don't see how we get out of that. I mean,
well, I'll tell you how we get out of it. It's that, Larry Ellison will someday come to regret having spent, too much money to buy two kind of broken media companies, Paramount and Warner Brothers.
mm-hmm.
Way too much money. Because if you think about those companies, the value of Paramount and the value of Warner's, Paramount being what we used to call Viacom,
Mm-hmm.
was in their cable properties. That's where, if you looked at those companies 10, 15 years ago, the greatest value of those companies were in their cable properties. So for Viacom, MTV, and Nickelodeon were these gigantically important networks. And for Warner Brothers Discovery, it was CNN, HBO, and of course, when they combined with Discovery, it was all those Discovery networks. Those networks are almost worth nothing now. I mean, there was 15 Discovery channels, and I will promise you that on 13 of them, on any given night, there's 5,000 people watching them. So they're almost worthless. And the same with MTV. Who the
Oh,
fuck watches
yeah,
MTV anymore?
right.
Who watches Nickelodeon? Nobody. They're all on YouTube, watching cartoons on YouTube. So these people radically overpaid, and so Ellison will figure it out eventually. He will have problems with Oracle, and he'll need money, and he'll sell it back to Netflix. He'll send the Warners back to Netflix for chump change. It will be so worthless. So, I mean, I think that's how it ends. I think it just doesn't work out.
Wow.
And
See,
eventually,
and I hadn't thought was that the pain of that overpayment would ever be greater than its value as a thumb on the scale.
no, no, no. Just consider what's going to happen. So interest rates are going to go up, right? We're going to have inflation.
Right.
So these people are all financing these things with junk bonds.
Oh, right, right.
So junk bond rates will probably go into the high 16, 18%. So they're going to be paying a huge amount of interest for these purchases. And, they will never be investment grade credits. They're junk credits. And so they're all going to have to suffer. And, I mean, look, Elon Musk may be able to con people into thinking that SpaceX and XAI and Grok and all these are worth, what is he saying?
Oh, yeah.
I
I
think,
thought he was starting like his offering at seeking like $1 trillion, right?
No, it's some ridiculous amount of times, like $750 billion
There you
or
go.
something. People may be conned into this because they think Elon is a genius, but he's not. Elon, you know, didn't invent Tesla. He
Right,
bought the company and
right,
fired the inventor. He didn't invent Twitter. He bought the company and fired the person who invented it. He has not invented anything really. Even his rocket companies, he doesn't design those rockets. He's just the marketing guy.
right.
And
Or
the thing that Elon
what he
figured out
invented,
was that,
Jonathan, was Elon Musk.
yeah, so, and as far as his notion that we should go to Mars, as I wrote in, The End of Reality,
Yeah,
that's one of the craziest notions in the world. You would go to Mars and have to live inside a plastic bubble with super coated to keep the X-rays out from killing you. And if for some reason you went outside and there was a little hole in your spacesuit,
right.
you would have cancer in 10 minutes. So it's one of the most inhospitable places in the world. So
In the
what?
universe, actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh no, I mean the notion that that whole Mars thing isn't just a joke to most
But
people.
but guess what? We're going to pay for it.
Oh,
Why do
that's
you
true.
think they're going to put a base on the moon so Elon can get to Mars from the moon?
I know.
I mean, this and Elon's guy is running NASA. So
Oh,
it's crazy.
it is. I mean, it's funny. I come into this thinking we're hopeless, and now I feel worse.
Well, look, people will eventually realize the corruption, the con job that they've been sold. And if Trump's crypto fortune wipes out, or Bitcoin is selling at a half it was what it was when Trump took office
The second time.
the second time. So, people will realize that, a lot of this is just um, full scale corruption on a level that we've never just seen before.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And and worse. I mean, because it's the person that they bought with their money to run the government is not just their servant, he's also a madman.
Yeah, yeah. But all this talk on the left of the 25th Amendment is nonsense. Do you
Nonsense.
think do you think JD Vance has the balls to try and stage a coup against Trump? No way.
Right. And the
Do you
fact
think
that
Pete
basically
Hegseth
what
would vote for Trump to go out?
right. I mean the 25th
Pete,
Amendment depends on
if
the
Trump
cabinet
if Trump
rising
was
up.
gone, if Trump was gone, Pete Hegseth would be fired, and then he'd have to go to The Hague to answer for what he's about to do.
Right.
Although I guess they're looking for an off ramp today. So as usual, it's Taco Tuesday, right?
Yes, it is. Let me see. So you sort of said that economics will mitigate some of the horribleness. Um, but in terms of, let's go back to that counterculture piece,
Right.
because one of the things that I'd say two big things you start out with is one, the problem is oligarchy, and then you look at it in tech, you look at it in media, you look at it in military. Okay, but the solution, you say, always has seemed to arise from a counterculture, from artists who inspire people to think and feel differently.
Exactly.
Given the current setup, do you see that happening, or is it just we hope it does?
Well, it could happen. I was kind of encouraged by the two movies that won the most Academy Award nominations this year, One Battle After Another
Yeah.
and Sinners, because they were both very countercultural movies, right?
Yes, they were.
And in that sense, it's that thinking and feeling artists are not gone completely.
And they were both also financially successful. They weren't
Yeah,
just award
no,
winners.
exactly.
The
What
audience
is what
also
is
went to them. Yeah.
what is more distressing is the music business.
Yes.
And I can't really figure that out. I mean, some of my younger friends tell me, "Well, why are you worrying about hip hop? Hip hop is over. It's a dead scene. There hasn't been anything original in hip hop in 5 years. So don't worry about that. Why don't you think about what's new coming up?" And some of that is what I call Americana, which is kind of the new folk music,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a beautiful scene, and obviously I'm old enough to have been around in 1962, 63 when Bob Dylan first started playing. And, the folk music scene was pretty small. I mean, he would play at clubs.
That's right.
He wasn't playing at big, he was playing at the bitter end. And,
Yeah.
I mean, so uh, maybe it starts on that small level of a scene with people playing acoustic instruments, a kind of anti-AI scene, an anti-technology scene. And maybe that's the beginning of something fresh that will revive the music industry. I would hope so, because
Is it possible for them to make a living?
yeah,
Because
they can. They
streaming
can
plays
make
so poorly.
they make a living the way the folk musicians did.
Yeah.
They play in clubs and small bars and venues, and sometimes if they're really successful, like Billy Strings, they sell a lot of streams.
Yeah.
A lot of music gets listened to on Spotify and Apple Music, and so they can make a living that way too. So, I mean, I'm not completely discouraged, but I do think that we need a renaissance for sure, because it's our problems are cultural more than they are just political. I've always used the notion that culture eats strategy for breakfast every
Right.
morning,
Right. Right.
um, which is an old business saying, but it's applies to all sorts of things,
Yeah.
because I think culture eats politics. I mean, I certainly saw that the musicians were more aligned with Martin Luther King in 1962, long before Lyndon Johnson ever got on board and said we got to have a civil rights movement and a civil rights bill in 1965. So, I mean, I think the culture is the kind of early warning system,
Yeah. Yeah.
and but
Let me ask you one thing about that, and you can let this be the last question, since you've sort of been doing the what gives us hope piece already. Is why are there so few young people at No Kings?
you got me. I really I am confused. Although I must say, I have a friend from Minneapolis who says that a lot of the people who were the real activists, who were out on the streets blowing their whistles when the ICE people were coming around and warning people and carrying food to the people who didn't dare come out of their houses and go to the grocery store because they thought they'd be picked up by ICE. A lot of those people were young people. So there was an activism in Minneapolis and St. Paul that was quite remarkable, and it was not a bunch of 60-year-olds. It was younger people doing that, and so I think it's possible. I mean, and I think in the most recent No Kings, there were more younger
Yes.
people,
Yes, there were.
and so maybe it just takes time for people. The thing that's different from the 60s is you and I were not scared of Richard Nixon. I think a lot of people are scared of Donald Trump in the sense that they feel he might come after them or sick his bully boys on them online.
Well,
You know, now the
or I mean, if you are a young person and you saw what happened to that woman, you know, that Tufts, uh, I don't know if she was a student or a teacher or both, you know, plucked off the street by uh, with no warrant by goons with masks on. That's a reality. You're right. We knew Nixon was dangerous, but not so much to us.
yeah, and we weren't scared of him. And he didn't have also he didn't have his own secret police with
Right?
masks,
Right.
which is a scary element. And we will see how that plays out during the midterm election, because if he sends his goons to the polling places, there's no doubt that it will scare some people away.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's I mean, Black Lives Matter had a great number of young people, and so maybe
Right.
they begin to come out. And I guess another proof in the pudding will be at the midterms.
Yeah. Look,
Yeah.
I think the war is genuinely unpopular among young people as well as among our age bracket. And so
Yeah, I think the war kind of woke
I
them
I,
up.
I think and look, if inflation kicks in and prices keep going up, and farmers don't have fertilizer, and so prices for food goes up, there will be a real hell to pay for Trump and the Republicans. It's almost like they have a suicide pact,
Yes.
that they're just going down this road and they don't seem to care. But if they look at any of the polling, they can't help but worry that their time is over.
Right. Right. And so then what you get is that the more the unpopularity increases, the more the threats to the midterm probably increase, and that all becomes sort of this amazing moment of truth,
Well,
um,
look,
where we
we've
come out of
seen
that.
in the last 48 hours, when Trump feels he's
Yeah,
trapped,
trapped.
he gets very irrational. So we have no idea what he might do.
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay, well, listen,
okay, thank
Terrence,
you so
it's
much
been
again.
good.
Let me tell people Jonathan's most recent books are Move Fast and Break Things and The End of Reality. Look for his writings in Rolling Stone. And I just want to compliment you. Those are not just, you know, quick topical things. Those are your like fairly deeply considered thoughts about where we
Yeah,
are and
yeah.
where we
Look,
might
I
get.
I, I did something very counterculture, which the editor of Rolling Stone supported, which was to write 4 and 5,000 word essays.
Yes,
And that's, of course, in an era of 15-second TikToks, is completely countercultural. But I do think that if people spend their time and really look at them, and they're all in front of the paywall, so you don't have
that's
to
right. That was
you don't
I
have
at
to pay
first thought
for
they
them.
were behind the pill, but they're not. They're
Yeah,
available. And what I was saying also,
yeah,
it wasn't just that you wrote with length; it's that you actually sort of went upstream on things and said, "Now, what's behind this? What? How did we get here?"
yeah.
It's a deeper reckoning with our current crisis than a lot of what people will read, and I
There,
recommend
there,
it.
there's one other book, I'll just leave you with this, that I wrote, which was a memoir called The Magic Years, which
Yes.
for anybody who's interested in the world of rock and roll and Bob Dylan and Scorsese and all that, there's some rich material in there too. Anyway,
Okay, and
thanks so
John's
much,
website
man.
is johntaplin.com. That's one word, JONTAPLIN.com. Thank you, Jonathan. Keep up your good work.
Okay, great.
Due to some tech difficulties, Jonathan Taplin was unable to record for the full hour, so I'm going to take this opportunity to offer some thoughts on the current moment. Trump's unconstitutional billion-dollar a day war of choice on Iran continues, and it's impossible to know what will happen next or how much worse things could get. But we, the people, still have power, and here's some ways to use it. Fossil fuels fund Trump, and even before the war, he was doing everything he could to turn back progress on renewable and clean energy. Well, as fuel prices climb, it's never made more sense to buy an electric vehicle. What's different today compared to previous gas price spikes, EVs are more available and affordable than ever. Good news about used EVs are all over the media, so that while angry drivers wait in long lines for discount fuel, EV owners can be literally driving by on sunshine. After Mike Johnson kept Congress out for weeks to avoid dealing with the war or Jeffrey Epstein, they're back in session. So contact your representatives on at least these 4 issues. 1, do what you need to do to force the Department of Justice to obey the Epstein Files Transparency Act. 2, stop the SAVE Act. In response to false claims of voter fraud, it mandates voter suppression, voter IDs, and limits on vote by mail. 3, no DHS funds for ICE or Customs and Border Patrol without guardrails that bring them in line with other forms of law enforcement. And 4, no supplemental funds for a war of choice. Commenting on one issue at a time is most effective, and let's make it a steady drumbeat. Plan to join May Day, a day of no work, shopping, or business as usual. Inspired by the Twin Cities Day of Truth in Action, where thousands refused work, school, and shopping on a single Friday in January, the coalition behind No Kings is calling for doing the same thing nationally May 1st. And finally, the defeat of authoritarian Viktor Orban in Hungary is a big deal. He stood as a model and a hero for the American right. In the words of Ezra Levin of Indivisible, quote, he didn't just lose, his regime was electorally crushed with record-breaking turnout, unquote. How big a victory? Well, the opposition now has the supermajority needed to amend their constitution and dismantle Orban's 16 years of authoritarian consolidation. And what does this say to us? Levin again. Quote, the outcome of the Hungarian election makes one thing very clear. Organized, massive, nonviolent people power can defeat an Orban-style authoritarian even in a weakened democracy. Timothy Snyder, author of On Tyranny, posted, quote, Hungarians showing how to win big in an unfair election. Organize and protest and vote and demand profound change. Our job? We need to build a movement big enough and powerful enough and with enough trust in each other to overcome everything the administration is inevitably going to do to negate the popular will in November's elections. And we will. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles, and to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. You can subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast at my site or at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, most podcast sites. You can find over 500 episodes at most of those sites, including Michael Lewis, Naomi Klein, Bill McKibben, Andrew Ross Sorkin, Connie Rice, George Packer, Doris Kearns Goodwin. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement of guests and issues, plus links to 10 to 15 articles I choose each week to flesh out the conversation, sign up at my site or email me at temcnally@mac.com, TEMCNALLY@mac.com. Thanks to Kiana Williams in production and George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all to you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely.